Welcome everyone who's attending. Great to see so many of you join on the call today. Just picking up from Lucas, we're going to start with a snapshot of where Rico's at March 26. So to date, we've had 8 councils sign up with Rico. There's 35 consultancies in the private sector using Rico, and overall to date, there's been over 10,000 projects done in Rico. As Lucas alluded to, late last year, we have expanded Rico into Australia. So that's an exciting thing, and more on that. The kind of key numbers we're pushing with Rico is 20 to 30% time saving per project to date, and with 100% of planners feeling more confident in their decisions, and also a significant chunk of non-billable time. So that's kind of, I guess, just a summary of how many customers, how many projects are being done, where Rico is geographically. Speaking of, I just want to say a big thank you. I know a lot of customers will be on the call today. So yeah, just thank you to all our customers. We at Rico are very much a customer-driven company. Everyone in the business, including even the software developers who can be quite removed from the front lines, are always listening to your feedback and really trying to respond to that. We do build Rico for you, and we've always got the customers in mind when we're doing it. So we really appreciate everyone's support. A thing to start on this year, or a big piece of work currently at Rico, is expanding our coverage across New Zealand. So we currently cover 65% of planning areas by application volume. So you can imagine the different areas are quite skewed in terms of there's some big application volume areas like Auckland and Christchurch, Queenstown, and in the regional like environment, Canterbury region. These are large volume areas with a lot of applications, and then it does have quite a long tail in terms of a lot of smaller councils with less volumes going through them. So by number of councils, we've got about 30% of the areas in New Zealand covered, but by application volumes at 65. Aiming to get that 65 to 95 by 2026. And so it's fast become about a third of Rico's operation is actually loading in new plans from different areas and setting up the GIS connections in those areas so that information can be pulled into people's Rico workflows. So we really hope that'll offer consultants in New Zealand the ability to lodge or create and lodge applications in Rico in a lot more locations, and it gives consultancies more mobility to work. For example, if you're an Auckland consultancy, outside of Auckland and surrounding areas, and even across the different islands. So that's something we're excited about, and a real operational thing there. This is about loading in tens of thousands of pages of PDFs or with e-plans there in an HTML kind of format, but a lot of data being loaded in there. We did last year, as part of the Australian expansion, to load in the South Australian plan, which is all amalgamated under one single planning framework. South Australia is similar population to Auckland, so it's similar in a way to Auckland's unitary plan, but it's one plan that covers a really large area and diversity in planning issues managed. So overall, the plans in the GIS link into Rico's functionality, and I'll talk about that a bit more later, but this is a real operational thing we are expanding on. Speaking of the Australian expansion, there's a picture of us outside the city of Marion, which is in South Australia, and I did see a few from Marion joining today, which is great to see you. We have moved into Australia late last year. We did meet with 24 councils and 10 consultancies from Australia. We did a trip in December, and mainly around the contact we've had is mainly through New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, and South Australia, with that pilot underway in Marion. Won't go into detail on that because I'm conscious it's a new area, but we do have a document summarizing key trends, which was really interesting, just seeing how the overlap between the Australian and the New Zealand planning frameworks, and how there were quite a few similarities in terms of the challenges faced and where the bottlenecks in the process were. and also how different planning frameworks impacted the actual application processing. In some areas, like New South Wales, very fragmented planning framework with lots of different plans versus that South Australia with a single plan for the whole state. So yeah, let us know if you want us to send that through to you after the call. Key learnings we've seen coming through the case studies. So we do try as much as we can to get in touch with our customers after they've started using Rico and try to get feedback on the results as part of ongoing improvement. The kind of most obvious benefit that we hear is a time saving, and that's around that 20 to 30%. But the potentially more interesting or I guess less expected benefit is the benefits of having a system. So that's a system for consistent planning assessments, more consistent planning assessments. What we find is, especially across teams and larger teams, it's really hard to control the consistency and the quality. So that's something that's kind of less direct than a Rico saves X amount of time, but it's emerging as potentially one of the key things that keep people using Rico, is just having that system helps control quality and consistency so much better. So that's kind of the key themes we've seen, and we've really used that to refine our mission. We really see Rico as a system for faster, more consistent planning assessments and decisions at scale. And so we're really kind of marching to the beat of that drum and have refined that based on what we're kind of hearing the benefits are from the customers and trying to double down on those. I would, as Lucas mentioned, we have a few of these little Q&A reminders. If anyone does send through any questions, these are going to pop up every now and then, and Lucas will flag them up for us to discuss. So yeah, just a few reminders. If anyone has a question, please don't hesitate to send that through. There'll be other opportunities to kind of ask and answer as we go. I'm assuming no questions on that part yet.
Yeah, so far no questions. Must be clear. That's good.
Cool. Awesome. So with that recap of the year kind of to date done, I want to move into our vision for technology and planning assessments and decisions going forward. This is something that we're always refining, and there's been a lot of feedback from customers, but there's also been technological shifts in terms of AI has become a lot. Rico started 6 years ago, and I guess AI has become a lot more mainstream 2 years ago. So there's been these sorts of shifts in the technology space as well. So I'll start kind of just framing for everyone on the call how we look at planning assessments, applications, and decisions from Rico. We look at them through a process lens. So we kind of see it in three parts. The first part being inputs. And inputs are things like what the site features are, what planning considerations apply to a proposal, what the proposal features are, so which parts of the plan they'll trigger, and obviously the supporting documents and inputs from other specialists and those things. Then in the middle, we have the logic. So the logic is what we do with those inputs to get our desired output. So this can be things like interpreting how planning considerations apply to a given proposal, developing or detailing how a proposal responds to a given planning consideration, identifying and addressing other considerations that impact decisions that aren't in the planning framework. So those might be things such as effects on neighbours or those things which are not written up front. And then overall, there's making your overall determinations about the levels of effects and whether they're acceptable or if they impact certain neighbouring parties and things like that. So that all covered in the logic. Finally, the outputs are, to put simply, the reports that we see. So that might be in New Zealand, an assessment of environmental effects being lodged to a council, might be a decision report or recommendation prepared by a council processing officer. In Australia, they're similar. They have the development applications and statements of environmental effects submitted, and then delegate assessments done in councils as well. So that kind of just gives you a kind of a framework of how we look at applications and at the process. And what we see is that most planners see problems in outputs. So you might get a report that you think is inconsistent or not aligning with how you wanted, whether you be a reviewer within a consultant planning team, or whether you be a counsel receiving a report from an applicant or agent. We see these issues with things being inconsistent, details missed, logic becoming kind of fluffy or unclear, reports becoming overly long and hard to read. These are the main pieces of feedback we hear, and that's kind of where the problem, I guess, first manifested and where we first started to notice it. But what we've found looking into the problem is that really the issues start with inputs and logic. I can go into them one by one. So with inputs, this kind of relates to the saying of like, when it comes to a process, if the inputs are no good, it's a garbage in, garbage out kind of deal. So it basically means that errors at the input stage mean the logic is flawed from the start and often has to be redone, and then redone after the inputs are then correct. So you have to go back to correcting the inputs and then rerun the logic. So that's kind of a crucial first step. We see currently most planners do this ad hoc. To collect the inputs for a project, they might jump between the plan, GIS, and application documents and start trying to detect the relevant planning considerations. A lot of planners do that already and do it pretty effectively. The main issue is that the work is hidden and unrecorded. So that means that someone else reading or reviewing your work needs to reverse engineer what the inputs into your decision were. So for example, if you just have a planning decision report or a planning application report, it's not always clear what inputs were checked for, like was the site checked for this feature, did the proposal, was it checked for this feature, and what kind of rules were triggered. So that's kind of what we observe in practice. What Rico is advocating or has advocated with our customers, especially more recently, is to have an audit process. And the aim of that audit process is to ensure that all the inputs are accurate and complete. Basically, that means that the process, if I go back, is correct from the start and ready to move into the logic stage. So to be a bit more practical, that looks like having the subject site details all clearly laid out, like what zones apply, what overlays apply, and recorded. And then we use checklists or advocate checklists as a simple method for ruling in or out relevant planning features or features of a proposal that might trigger a certain planning consideration. So it could be a site feature like being in a flood zone that triggers the need to consider natural hazards, or it might be a proposal feature like something to do with transport, like a new access way that triggers the need to deal with the transport planning considerations. So having that clearly laid out just shows the thought that's gone into what has been relevant. And as I'm sure many listening who use Rico, you will have seen both the subject site and the checklist pieces of the software. The next is the plan assessment, and this is shown on the right-hand side. Having all of this laid out documents the inputs from the planning framework. So we're talking about what rules the application triggers. And also on the right-hand side, you can see here any comments linking the parts of the proposal to the rules. So this is, again, just clarifying all of those inputs. And essentially what you're left with at the end of this audit process is an accurate and complete set of inputs. So you're actually ready personally to go and proceed to the logic stage of making a decision or assessment, but also a record that's transparent, auditable, and reusable. Yes. So as I mentioned, the key barrier in practice we've seen to that is a simple one. It's basically that it takes ages to make all of these tables and copy all of that stuff in, and a lot of people struggle to do that, especially at such a dynamic stage of a project where you are looking to quickly understand what's going on with the project, and there's always a kind of a tendency to jump to making the assessments and decisions. So there's that aspect. And what Rico really targets there is improving the automation kind of side of that. Next, in the logic side, when we started Rico, a lot of people would always say, oh, you're trying to make the golden template. And it became quite a common thing that people would say to us. And it's something that we thought about quite seriously, like, do we just try to make better templates? And it's often, I think, when people first hear of Rico, they're like, oh, no, we're happy with our template and we don't need you to try and make us a better template. But it kind of reminded us of that Henry Ford example when he said if before the car, if he asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And it sounds a lot like that with the templates, is templates are very much the status quo and still are a big part of the status quo for report templates, but they are not quite appropriate for what we've been trying to do. So basically, the fundamental flaw with templates that meant that Rico couldn't do them is that they are they are too rigid and specific. So while Rico shares the aim to save time and guide planners to write better assessments, when it came down to it, we couldn't offer templates that would handle all the different projects we knew were going to be thrown at it. And you can see today we've got both, for example, both people lodging and processing applications. We've got people in New Zealand and Australia using it, and even within New Zealand, the planning frameworks differ a lot, kind of district to district and region to region and that sort of thing. Essentially, templates are kind of pre-made bits of logic, and they rely on the fact that projects will be similar. So as soon as projects change or the nuances change, the templates become increasingly inaccurate. So what we've had to develop at Rico is a systematic approach. And by systematic approach, I mean that we rely on multiple components, so not just templates. The first kind of component you've already seen is that audit process and the audit steps to clarify the project-specific inputs and make sure they're accurate and complete. The second are these workflows, which provide structure and a step-by-step process to assessments and decisions. Within the workflows, we are encouraging instructions on each step. And the benefit of instructions is, as opposed to a template, they're more general and flexible. They kind of focus on what's the aim of a given step, like a site description. For example, the aim is to describe relevant features of the site, what kind of key considerations there might be, like the zoning, the overlays, any sensitive receptors around the site or existing kind of uses at the site. Then we get more specific to templates. They kind of provide an example of the response structure and style. So we're kind of moving from more conceptual level, what are we aiming to do here, to actual like more of an example. And finally, we have past project data too, which are obviously fully completed examples that are obviously for specific projects and are quite refined. So essentially, what we're doing there is we are covering both the more general considerations and aims of the given step in a planning assessment or decision so that the process is adaptable and flexible. But we're also covering example responses and completed responses so that we have an idea about what actually a finished thing looks like, and we can get more closer from just an idea about what to write to how actual finished examples work. And so together, those things are where all of the logic for producing planning decisions and assessments kind of lie. And that kind of takes us, that's kind of the context or the backdrop that I wanted to come to AI from, because AI has been a big kind of shift in the last couple of years, and we've taken our time thinking about it and how we can best integrate it into Rico and prepare planners to best use AI. And essentially those steps of inputs and logic and viewing planning assessments decisions as a process have really set us up well for making the most of AI. Because essentially, like the clearer the inputs are and the logic is, it's the perfect companion for AI. So I like to liken working with AI like working with a planner who's brand new to the industry, doesn't really understand exactly what to do, is kind of lacking that context and experience. In the same way, these large language models, they don't know what they don't know. If something isn't clear, they'll make something up, and all of that creates a lot of room for errors and inaccuracies. In the planning domain, accuracy and completeness is a huge concern. Like it's a massively important to good assessments and decisions. And so that's kind of an important ticket that we need to, important consideration rather, that we need to handle. So all of the improvements we've discussed to this point are critical to increasing the accuracy and reliability of the AI results. And we can see how they link, like the audit steps clarify the project specific inputs, which basically list out all the contextual information for a project. And you can feed that into an AI and it will help give it better context. Workflows basically provide structure and instructions about what to be doing. Templates give an example of a desired output, right down to basic things like we like to lay assessments out with headings here and content here and that sort of level. And past project data, again, provides examples of a desired output. It also captures any things that might come into an assessment that weren't in the subjects, in the GIS or in the plan assessment. It's capturing those external things, like the fact that there might be some history at the site as well. So essentially here, our aim with AI is to provide you the infrastructure to get the most out of it. So current state of AI, those using Rico will see that AI is integrated into our text fields. So when you're writing a assessment, there's a little orange button. You can just see it a little bit grayed out there that you can click, and it brings up a prompt. And the prompt here is connected to OpenAI. We're using that model currently for our, this is very much in an early stage. And you can type a prompt. The prompt is aware of the context, so it knows which workflow step you're in. It knows that you're either doing a resource consent decision or a resource consent application or a development application if you're in the Australian context. And so it's aware of that. The first basic thing we're going to be adding is a prompt library. So the first thing that we've been finding is a lot of planners using AI are wanting to save different prompts. So you can see here, when you come to type in a prompt, we're going to have, just like in Rico, you can already have templates in for text field steps. We are having prompt templates. So you could save various prompts, click those, and it will bring them up for a given project. So this is basic, just gives you that kind of structure of how you might frame a prompt. Conscious that across teams, some people are more keen on using AI and put more effort into their prompts. These can be shared with others in the team who are kind of less or don't know as much what to do in terms of writing a good prompt. So that's kind of the first step that we're going to be adding. Next, we're going to be turning all the project information to date. So I'm talking about checklists, like you can see on the right here, where you've methodically gone through and said what does and doesn't apply to a site, which features in the proposal in the site are or aren't present. The subject site details, so information pulled from GIS, like the zoning, overlays, and things like that. And also the plan assessment, so the rules complied with and the provisions considered in the assessment. All of those are structured and saved in the background, and we're going to make those available in the prompts with these fields, like you can see, kind of like how fields look in Rico at the moment if you're a Rico user. And you can pull that information into a prompt with the simple kind of keystroke of adding that in. Now, what that's going to do is all of this data is highly structured and fully accurate. You can control the inputs down to the last detail. So the checklist now becomes an interface for you to tell the AI very easily what is relevant and isn't relevant to the site. So again, so it's not making things up and introducing room for inaccuracy. The subject site is pulled right from the GIS, and you even have the ability to edit your site name and things like that at that level. Again, just controlling what's input into that prompt. And on the rules side, the rules you're controlling, again, which rules are selected, any comments towards those rules, which provisions are selected, and any comments on those provisions as well. So you have full control over all of those inputs, and then you can insert them into an AI prompt seamlessly, just with a few clicks, and even include those as part of prompt templates. So it's really kind of this prompt window is very much becoming the kind of magic wand that you can pull different pieces of information in and apply certain logic to it. And the result of that is that you can write accurate and consistent reports in seconds. And I use the word draft, actually, because it's still not perfectly accurate. It's a massive improvement. You can see on the right-hand side here that this is an actual response or output we got using exactly the kind of prompt I showed on the previous page and plugging it into a template here. So you can see that just in this image here, we have the site information. Where possible, we always lock the site information to a reference. So you can see the site details here. They've got that kind of orange background to them. That's because they're a direct reference. They're not made up information. And what we're trying to do there is make more and more pieces of any response verifiably accurate. So for example, we know all of the site information has come from the GIS, and there's no chance that the AI has hallucinated or changed the title name or changed the site area and things like that. So we're really in an active exercise of reducing any kind of chance for the AI to hallucinate or introduce error.
It's actually interesting because Wendy asked a question, Wendy Harris, a question that is kind of linked to that. She said, I'm interested in the length of report that Rico produces. It's great to get more accurate and complete reports, but planning reports are tending to get longer and longer. Complete and concise reports are good. Any comments?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And we get asked it quite a lot. Essentially, what I see kind of happening here is with these things like the checklist and the subject site details and plan assessments, we're seeing a lot of that information being put into an appendix, and kind of so it's out of the report. And so what's happening is in that stage, you're isolating the inputs so that a counsel can come in or a reviewer can come in and just read what were the inputs to your decision before you're kind of applying any logic to them or making any arguments like, I think this is appropriate because, and that sort of thing. So we're seeing that being put into a separate report and reserved just for inputs. And as a result of that, we're also seeing decision reports or assessment reports focusing more on just the logic. So you're not having a site description that's exhaustively talking about which site features are and aren't present, or a description of the proposal that's going on about all of the various rules that it triggers. All of that information is available in the inputs and can be a lot more concise in the report, which is reserved for that logic and your actual assessments. So that's quite in practice, it's quite a shift. That's a behavior shift that kind of needs to take place when people to achieve that, where planners are used to writing most things in one report and not separating out the inputs. Some have moved more towards it than others. We see kind of a varying thing there. But essentially, we certainly don't advocate longer reports. We kind of focus on those clearer reports with the inputs separated out, and preferably a much shorter logic that just focuses on any kind of more contentious issues and the narrative or the logic that you've had to apply to reach a decision for those. So yeah, that's kind of how we see that issue being addressed, if that answers your question, Wendy.
Yeah, I hope so. Don't hesitate to ask for a complementary question if it is the case. We have another question to Reddit from Stephanie Hedgeman, who says, great work what you're doing at Rico. Thank you. How do you deal with the differences in data formats and naming convention, etc., across different authorities? And also, I can add different countries because now we're also expanding into Australia. And what would need to change across the whole planning system to better enable the use of digital tools like Rico and AI?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephanie. So manually, in short, is how we handle it. As I mentioned at the start, it's almost a third of Rico's operation, and that probably wouldn't exist if the plans were all in a clean, machine-readable format, or would be a much smaller kind of component. Essentially, we're having to uplift the quality or from whether it's from a PDF or an HTML, to put it in a structured data format that powers these digital assessments. And that kind of always requires quite a bit of effort. And do you mind, Lucas, just repeating that question so I'm making sure I'm getting all of it?
Of course. Let's see.
And yeah, so in terms of what would make the whole planning system better, it would be getting things in a more machine readable format. But that would make things a lot simpler for us to load. We have kind of built our system to be very adaptable, like in terms of, for example, the South Australian, their plan is called the Planning and Design Code. To make that work in Rico's plan assessment, which is the same plan assessment functionality that works in Auckland Unitary Plan, for example, it's got to be very adaptable. The activity statuses there are different. They're not even called activity status. They're more like assessment pathways. And so we've had to kind of handle all that nuance on our side. But yeah, simply put, to get the plans easier to load in, more standardization across the authorities is one thing, and in a machine readable format that we can automatically kind of scrape it into our system would also save the time or enable companies like Rico to work.
Yeah, and she asked another question, so it's good. It means that she's interested in the presentation. She said one more question. Do you expect that there will be increased government focus, support, and investment into the digitalization of planning in NZ, maybe as part of the RMA reform?
Yeah, that's another good question. And I think a lot of it relates to what the role of which part the government, the central government touches on, which part local councils, local governments touch on, because different and which parts, example, private sector companies like Rico touch on, because there's kind of a whole ecosystem here of people who might work together to save an overall problem. And if one person or one of those parties tries to do more of it, the results can be a bit worse. So for example, I think with there's been this idea of the central government making a software for the whole country to use. That kind of has a high risk that you end up like one of these. I think that NovaPay is a famous example for the teachers' payroll, where the costs blow out and it becomes too detached from the end user. So I think that the central government could focus more on standards for the data that make it an easy thing to interface with for a private company. So for example, this plan data and the GIS data, if that's in a more standardized format, it makes it easier for us and other private companies to consume and offer products like Rico. So that's kind of the main thing I'd do is be careful about who does what in there to make sure that the solutions kind of stay the best incentives. And different councils too, they do have a lot of variation across the councils. And so it just has to be, I guess, a considered approach for helping councils come into a more standardized format without losing the local kind of issues and things that they need to manage. Yeah, that's kind of the brief thoughts on that. I could talk for a lot of the webinar about that.
And yeah, actually, she said, thank you, great answer. So that's good. Happy that we answered your question. Also, another question from Craig McInes. I hope I said that well. He said, this is really interesting hearing where you're headed with AI. Can you confirm that the data we have in Rico is ring-fenced for our own projects and isn't be shared with OpenAI for training their models?
Yes. So yeah, another good question there, Craig.
And that we have a lot, by the way. So it's a very important concern. Yeah,
a common concern. So at this stage, the data is, we have an enterprise with agreement with OpenAI. It's not used to train their models. That's not enabled. In terms of the ring fencing, we also ring fence your data and don't share it across organizations. I think the key thing to point out here is that you can see in the functionality of the AI that we're describing, it's very much kind of more making your data into building blocks for you to use. We're not training a model that's going to do more with just an AI coming up with things on its own. We're kind of wanting the planner to maintain full oversight and control of, I want to bring in the plan assessment and have the plan assessment help to write my description of the proposal. And that kind of constrains the AI to give that more accurate, reliable results. So the direction we're going very much points towards just making it a more usable and more kind of chunked so that planners can use it. And we aren't looking to train a model. Training a model is currently like a very, very expensive thing. And also would need a much bigger data set than Rico has. And we would have, I'm not aware of another business that would have a similar data set. But so that kind of training a model idea is quite far off. The closest thing you could do is fine tune a model. But even then, it's still prone to a lot of these inaccuracies when you don't have that structure of clear prompts, clear ring fences around, I just want to use maybe the rules assessment from the mixed housing urban zone and ring fencing that, or else there's just all this risk that the AI brings in kind of other things. But yeah, short answer to your question, we do ring fence it per organization, and it's not used to train OpenAI's models.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think many people are wondering the same, so thanks for that. Maybe we can continue first to leave people digest a bit and have other questions for later on the presentation.
Cool. Yeah, no, keep the questions coming. Do love the questions. And so yeah, you can see here the reports. So we can basically take templates, use that project specific information, and use prompts to convert those into responses a lot faster. Again, like I say this a lot of the stuff Rico's doing is organizing information and formatting it and saving you having to do complex kind of copy pasting and reformatting of things. So it's pulling that information into the prompt and helping you do these. We make it as accurate as possible, but it's still at the level of being a draft. Like you can see here, we've invested a lot into Rico's text interface, like these text fields on Rico, giving you a lot of the functionality Word has, but trying to keep it simple and constrained because Word can get a bit complicated. But we've put a lot of investment into those text fields so that planners still have that control over editing their reports and drafting it. And the reason for that is we know it's so important to have that oversight. And we're not wanting to come in here and act like the AI is able to do more than it is. It's something that we see making a big jump, but we still see the need for that editing and oversight. And so we're designing it with editing and oversight at the kind of center of the design philosophy there. One other thing, the AI we've found is making it really easy to make other types of reports or to tailor similar project information to different audiences. What I mean when I say that is you might pull your site data in, do a checklist and do a plan assessment. And I might want to, with that, make a feasibility study for a client. I might want to make an assessment of environmental effects. If I'm a council, I might want to make a decision report with that, or I might want to make just a little memo to send to the development engineer to get their inputs on a given consent. So what the AI is helping there is, because Rico's organized your project information well, we can feed that into a prompt that's aimed at, for example, producing a memo to a development engineer to get their inputs on an issue. And it can take all that information and frame it in a way that best solicits that information. So you can have a report that you'd send to them with potentially like the project context, the reasons for consent, and what matters you're wanting their input in, and it can tailor those. So essentially what it's an opportunity we see there, and this is already starting emerging on the consultancy side with feasibility reports, being able to do that initial check and get a feasibility report out of it. This is all encouraging people to do more of the checklists and the plan assessments. I'm conscious when we go to most new planning teams, they are doing that to varying levels, and some people see it as kind of a redundant step. And to be honest, in some people's case, it might be. It's less useful for some people than others. But the AI is making those check sheets, using the GIS and the plan assessments, a lot more important because it enables all of these things to be done a lot easier. So we see that as being quite a big shift in behavior. With Rico, we always try to have a product that people can just start using and they don't have to change their behavior too much, because that's kind of quite complex. But a shift we see of people that are using it is buying into those earlier stage things so that they can take advantage of these functionalities. And we see that with AI, that's going to only increase because there's so much more kind of opportunities with those to, as I say, create a feasibility report faster, which can help you win more business with clients, or for a council, create a specialist memo, which helps you get the correct information up front from a specialist. Cool. I do have the Q&A, but we might just time-wise, unless there's a quick one.
We have one new question from Hannah. Can you use the council's data stored in Rico to do other analysis like assessment, team workload monitoring, identify workload peaks, distribution across planners, etc., or analysis conducted by strategic planners reviewing planning policy zoning?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say where I see the most opportunity there is for people analyzing like at the strategic planning level. Rico, if you've done an assessment in Rico, we have all of the reasons for consent, rules triggered, all of those things are stored and organized. So you can go through and, for example, we have the potential. So this is something we're developing and councils have requested, but we are still developing it. But we have all the building blocks there for you to, for example, say, show me all the projects that triggered this reason for consent, or and have them all brought out to you. And you can then use that to be like, well, how much did those projects cost to process, or how complicated were they, and get into things like that. So the level of data and the reporting capabilities of projects done in Rico is a lot higher because we have such granular information. And that's something we're going to do. We have kind of in the roadmap for the next year, as well as developing out that reporting dashboard.
I have a question that you're going to like, but I think we're not going to reply it now. You're going to see why. So at the council side, is Rico linked to the consent lodgement information? The information of the applicant is inputting automatically pulled into Rico's project information to reduce double handling?
So
sit tight.
Yeah.
Some answers are going to come later on the presentation. We have another question from Wendy. Does Rico provide a format for other experts to feed into the resource consent process? For example, development engineer report, ecologist, reserve staff, etc.
Yeah, so that, Wendy, that's exactly the kind of reports we're thinking. So in the first instance, depending on whether or not you can convince your development engineers to get on Rico, you have the option for a planner to just use Rico to create a more structured kind of specialist input memo, which you can send and they can just fill out in Word and you have it that way. Otherwise, we are also looking at the opportunity to include their workflows in Rico as well.
Oh, yeah, I think you can relieve Stephanie's.
Yeah, so Lucas is.
She saw the cliffhanger, so we must.
A cliffhanger question for the next section. So
exactly.
To this point, we've talked about inputs and we've talked about logic, but we haven't talked about the outputs. So the key thing with outputs is, at the moment, like put simply, these are reports. If we strip back a report, the primary aim of a report is to communicate information. So if I'm an applicant or agent lodging a report to council, it's to communicate the planning assessment that's been done on that proposal. If I give a report to a client, same thing. Communication is a key bottleneck in planning decisions at the moment. Between applicants and agents on the lodgement side and councils on the processing side, for every application, there's unclear and changing requirements. For councils, every application they receive is in a different format. That means there's interpretation required to kind of work out what the key information is. And there's also manually repeated work across councils and agents and applicants in terms of they're doing a lot of the same assessment, but they kind of have to both do it over. And so we view all of these issues collectively as communication issues, as basically information going from one person to another. And where that communication fails, RFIs, emails, phone calls, and rework are all needed to kind of fill the gaps. And that's currently creating a big amount of waste in planning assessments and decisions. And we hear about this all the time from both sides of the industry. So the next kind of leap forward we have with Rico is what we're calling a smart application. And this is a leap forward in the interface between how councils and applicants and agents work together. So we've already in Rico established a standardized process for creating an audit trail of a decision or assessment inputs. So those are the subject site details, the checklists, and the plan assessment. We've created a standardized process that most Rico users today are using and have adopted on both the applicant, agent, and the council side. We are looking to maintain fully customizable workflows for reports, like with decisions in them. So we're talking about assessments of environmental effects for consultants and more decision recommendations and those types of reports for applicants, for councils. So we're keeping that bit's inherently subjective, and we're keeping that bit flexible. And finally, we're looking to introduce a smart application format that sends projects between users. So if I am a consultant using Rico to produce a project, and a council is then, we have the situation exists already in New Zealand where consultants are using Rico, they're downloading reports to Word and converting them to a PDF and then submitting them to council, and none of that information is transferable. So the kind of answer we've got there is a smart project file format. So basically, as an applicant or an agent, I'll be able to send the council my Rico project in a smart project file format. The council will then be able to open that file in Rico. The council can then see every decision you've made in the audit component. So all your answers to the checklist questions, all the plan assessment, they can see that. They can then accept it, reject it, or modify it so that they can either, when they agree with you, they accept it and it automatically populates that information in their report. When they reject it, they can either send back an RFI and have a clear framework for sending you back an RFI because it's in the same format you've prepared the application in, or they can modify it if you were slightly wrong or if there's a correction they'd make and then accept it into their project as well. All of this will auto-populate all of the adoptable information from an application. So in the first instance, the standardized process for clarifying inputs is the more objective things. We have seen that that's what consultants will adopt. We have seen that the decision, like the assessment reports, because they're subjective, we want to keep those flexible so that people lodging applications can continue to both innovate their approach and improve their approach to applications to the subjective components, and that the subjective component also changes a lot. But that standardized component will allow the front end nuts and bolts of a project to be more easily adopted by a council. They are then able to also, if for example, they want to adopt your site description or your description of the proposal, they're also in the same way able to pull that into their decision reports and accept that and then modify it as they need. So basically, the idea here is up front, we're wanting to put consultants on the same page as the council, where we've already found they're comfortable being on the same page as the council, and that is using the GIS, doing the checklists, and doing the plan assessment. Keeping people with the freedom, even council to council, a lot of different councils have different approaches to decision recommendations, as consultants have different approaches to AEEs. Keeping them with the flexibility, which also lets them flexible to develop their approach and continue to improve that, where there is no one way of doing things. There is no kind of golden template. It's kind of just developed with people as they can. That kind of standardizes it up front, and then just automating the putting that into it and also creating an interface for the council so that they're not just blindly adopting it. They're getting that, again, that control and granularity to pull individual inputs in or accept or reject those individual inputs. So ultimately that's going to reduce a lot of, well, in the first instance, it's going to make applications a lot more clear and accurate up front. So there's less need for correction. And then it's also at a basic time level going to save a lot of doubling up of that double entry of information into reports. And I hope you can gather there that this has taken a long time to kind of work out the how of what we do this, which allows planners to maintain that flexibility and that room to be individual or have their own approach and develop that approach, but also standardizing what we can standardize where it's more objective. It's quite a nuanced approach to it, and we're already seeing kind of all the building blocks in place for this. And so this year we're going to be looking to offer both councils and applicants that opportunity to connect together to try and tackle this bottleneck of more efficient communication. Yeah, so that's that one. I'll do a quick summary before opening it up to Q&A, the final Q&A. But to kind of just to provide an overview of what we've talked about today, planning is a unique domain. There's, in addition to, there's political and subjective components to the process, which technology can't solve. But there's also fundamental process problems that technology can solve. And we've been really careful to try and focus on those the process problems that technology can solve. The aim of that is to convert a lot of the waste we're seeing, which doesn't go towards better outcomes. We're wanting to convert that waste into resources that people can focus on achieving better outcomes. The ways that we're doing that is by improving the inputs to be more transparent, auditable, and reusable by different people in the process, turning logic into adaptable and repeatable systems that make things more consistent, making it faster to output accurate and consistent planning assessments and decisions, expanding our coverage to increase Rico's reach and deliver benefits on more applications and more projects, positioning planners for an optimistic AI future, like a use of AI that they can feel good about and empowered by. And then finally, tackling this big bottleneck in terms of communication efficiency between applicants and councils in a way that we've experimented a lot with and have kind of lined up, connected all the dots in a way that we think can really work at a practical level where we address things where both sides agree, and also have the freedom in sides where we're not doing that, so we're not imposing kind of a rigid structure on people where we don't need to. And the result of that is what our mission is all aimed at, is a system for faster, more consistent planning assessments and decisions at scale. So yeah, that's where I'll leave it today. I think we've got final Q&As that we can run through.
Yeah. Stephanie, I hope it answers your question. As you can see, you were ahead of your time, so I say that's good. And yeah, so thanks for all the questions so far. Don't hesitate if you have any more questions. We have a few minutes before we wrap this up. And yeah, of course, I don't think you precised it first, but if you're interested in this interconnection between basically the applicants and the councils, feel free to reach out, because we're also building like reflection and working groups around this. And this is an idea that we're building with the customers, as Foss said. So don't hesitate to reach out if it's something of interest. And yeah, looks like we don't have any.
We've got all the questions, have we?
Yeah, I think we had all the questions. Oh, questions from Bernard Wormington, I think known as Bernie by our email exchanges. Is the AI capability already built in, or is it an optional feature that can be activated if required and if the councils or other stakeholders is okay with it being used?
Yeah, great question, Bernie. We do have a toggle on and off ability for everyone's organization. So you can turn it off and on for your organization. We have done that because, yeah, everyone's at different stages. We're finding with some bigger teams, they're still working out their AI policy within a team and they want it off until they've developed that more. For us, it's literally a switch we have on the workflows. So yeah, and that's a valid kind of question there, and something that's come up and is, yeah, people, I would say, I think it's probably at the moment because a lot of existing customers, we have to turn the AI on. So a little plug, if you do want the AI, it's, as I mentioned, it's just in the initial stages, and I was announcing our roadmap, but we have that initial kind of integration. We can turn it on. I think it's about 50-50 the customers that do and don't have it turned on at the moment.